So what we're looking at here then is the Neve G3D, which is an upgrade for the Genesys consoles to integrate this Atmos format.
Yeah, exactly. This is the world's first studio analog console that can mix in the Dolby Atmos format.
And it's also Dolby approved.
We've worked very closely with Dolby on this to create a platform that allows for object-based mixing directly from the console surface.
So it's focusing on Atmos for music. Why add this functionality to the Genesys consoles?
So what we saw was we have a lot of Genesys and Genesys Black users all over the world who are tracking with the console, mixing in stereo. And as Atmos has started to grow more and more in popularity, they're getting asked, can I do an Atmos mix in that studio? So they're upgrading everything in the studio, adding more and more speakers. And then what was happening was they were essentially doing an Atmos mix and pretty much turning the console off and doing it all in the box. So we saw an opportunity there to actually use the console that they have, invested so heavily in, and use a lot of the features that are already built into the console, such as digital control over analog features, to allow them to then mix in Atmos directly from the console surface.
Yeah, which makes total sense. You've already got the architecture here. As you mentioned, people have already invested in a console for stereo mixing. So it's great to be able to now introduce the capability to work in Atmos for this new technology. So can you give me a bit of a rundown as to what's included?
G3D system combines hardware and software to achieve Atmos mixing from the console surface. Included is a new monitor panel that has several new updates, including 3D monitor mode for the main monitor controller. You have touch-sensitive encoders for Atmos panning and a dedicated bank of 9 switches for remotely controlling specific functions within the renderer. We also have a new logo panel for the console itself, and we have an external hardware device that is used to output your 714 speaker system called the StarNet ADA16.
So this is for new customers. It's for existing customers as well who want to upgrade to this package, Genesys Black and Genesys Blue. But it's not just for music, is it?
Yeah, exactly. This isn't just for music customers. We've actually sold several systems over to customers in the video game industry because this is an ideal console for that format. You can do Foley recording on it, music recording, music mixing, and now Atmos immersive mixing, which in the video game industry is obviously really, really important.
So what kind of system requirements do we need to be able to run this G3D?
So it's quite varied. In this room here, we have a single computer setup. We have the Mac Studio that is running the multiple applications. So we're running Pro Tools on there, and we're running the Dolby Atmos renderer on the same device. So that's a perfectly acceptable type of setup. You can also use the G3D system with a dedicated renderer on your network. So you would have one Mac computer that's running your DAW, and then an external one that is running the renderer, and they both communicate through a local area network.
And what kind of interface are we using for this?
Again, it can be quite varied. There are a lot of different interfaces that will work with this system. You could have the analog side of the console connected to the analog I/O of your interface. That's perfectly acceptable. Or if you have the MADI system installed on the console and you have the high quality Neve conversion in the desk, you can output via MADI into an audio interface that has MADI connections. And there are a lot of modern interfaces that have multiple digital and analog I/O options, and for mixing in Atmos, that's ideal. And in this room, we're using an Avid Matrix as our main interface. So that Avid Matrix is connected to the Mac Studio here, and then we're connecting the console via MADI, and we're connecting the StarNet ADA16 for our speaker outputs via Dante. So that type of setup works really, really well. But this can be configured in lots of different ways depending on what your studio already has. You don't necessarily need to go out and buy a whole new interface to make this work. There's often ways that you can integrate the G3D system into your existing interface setup.
So with us using the console and the Matrix together, is all the routing done digitally?
It is. So the approach we've taken with the G3D is a hybrid approach to Atmos. And it makes sense because this desk is a hybrid desk. So instead of kind of reinventing the wheel and adding in 118 individual copper lines for the outputs of every object, what we've done is we've created a system that allows you to use the analog circuitry of each channel strip, and then do the routing into the renderer digitally.
So with you saying you're using the existing technology in the Genesys console, how do we get the signal from the analog channels into the DAW?
So in this mix here, you can see we have hardware inserts configured on 16 of the channels. And this gives us a loop through of the channel strip. So the signal flows from this hardware insert. It goes down into the Genesys channel strip, channel 1, goes through the analog EQ, the analog dynamics if you have them, and then it gets sent back out either pre or post fader back into your Pro Tools setup. So you can configure this quite simply in your I/O tab in Pro Tools. On the Insert tab, you can see here in this mix, I've got 16 hardware inserts configured that represent the 16 channel strips of my desk.
So we've got the signal coming in through our channel strips, it's going through the EQ, it's going through the dynamics, getting all that Neve flavor. How do we then get this information into the Atmos renderer?
So in this particular setup here, we're using the Dolby Audio Bridge. Now this could be done multiple different ways, but on this single computer system, we're using Dolby Audio Bridge to then route the signals from each Pro Tools channel strip into the renderer as an object. So you can see here we have our object outputs on each channel. And just like the hardware inserts, this is configured in your I/O tab. So you'll notice we have the inputs from the desk and the outputs. These are unchanged. So you can still do tracking and stereo mixing and everything else that you were doing previously with the Genesys. That's all still possible. And then you add the hardware inserts for injecting each channel strip when you're doing an Atmos mix. And then you can output into objects via the aux I/O feature by adding Dolby Audio Bridge to the system.
So now we've created objects which go into the renderer. What happens from that point?
So once all your I/O is configured, you've got your Neve channel strips injecting that Neve analog flavor into the Pro Tools mix, the signals going over the Dolby Audio Bridge into the renderer. This is where the new G3D software comes in, which allows you to remotely control all of the objects on your network.
So this new software is the brains behind the operation, if you like. So this is what was designed alongside Dolby. Can you give me a bit of an overview of this?
Yeah, so we pull up the software via the new 3D button. This is the new 3D tab, and you'll see here this looks very familiar. You have an object selection window on the left, and then you have a panning window on the right. And what we do is we set up a communication network from the console into the computer, the DAW computer. And this communication network is exactly what you would have already set up with the Genesys anyway. It gives you your DAW control, it gives you your Genesys control plugin control, and all of the digital control elements of working in the box on the console surface. So it's nothing new. We are just piggybacking the Dolby Atmos communication data on that same network. So from the top of the app, you scan for a renderer, and then this will look for any renderer that exists on your local area network. That could be on the same DAW computer, or it could be on a completely separate dedicated renderer computer in your studio. You select it, ready to control, and then you're ready to start building your Atmos mix from the G3D software.
So on the left, as you mentioned, you've got the object selection window. Can you just go over how that works?
Yeah, so this left-hand side, this shows you all 118 objects that are available on the Dolby Atmos renderer, and you can see it looks very familiar and very similar to what the renderer shows you. You can reach with the touchscreen and select objects from here or deselect them. So if I want to take hold of an object from the G3D software, I just select it ready for control from this touchscreen.
So the touchscreen that's used to select objects, is this an essential part?
The touchscreen is external to the system, and it's because every studio is different and may have a different layout. You can customize your studio by having either the central Genesys screen as your Genesys computer screen with the touchscreen functionality in the middle, or you could have, like we have here, a small USB powered touchscreen that's on an articulating arm so that you can put it within arm's reach in order to select objects, do object panning, and it's a very inexpensive solution to give you full Atmos functionality from the G3D system.
So selecting objects from the software enables it to be controlled.
It does. So if I select any object here from the object selection side of the window, it will then be available to control and pan around in 3D. And I can select a mono object just by pushing the object once. That then creates a mono object that's ready to be panned around. Or if I want to create a stereo object, I can push and hold. And then this will flash, allowing me to choose a secondary object to create an object pair. And that could be an adjacent object or a non-adjacent object. So it could be 11 and 12, or it could be 11 and 128. It doesn't matter. So when I push the second object, that has now created an object pair, which is ready to be panned as an object pair in the Dolby Atmos renderer. We also have some shortcuts that allow you to select all available objects or release all available objects. So if you're setting up a mix right from the very beginning and you don't want to have to manually go through 118 objects, you can just press a quick shortcut button to grab hold of all of them.
So we've grabbed our objects, we've selected them for control. How do we go about panning these around now?
So once your objects are acquired by the G3D system, you can select them for panning by using the arrows on the console. So I can select through and scroll through all of the available objects. You can see here we've got some mono and some stereo objects. Or I can use the drop down to select an available object, which could come in handy if you've got a lot of objects on your network.
So once we've selected the object for control on the software, how do we go about panning this around now?
So to pan in 3D space, there are multiple different methods. And this first method is where having a touchscreen in arm's reach really comes in handy. Because I have this on this articulating arm, I can quickly reach out and pan an object on the XY, front, back, left, right axis very, very quickly in a single one-handed motion. So I can go left to right, front to back, and so on.
And how about height as well?
So with the height axis, we can pan using multiple different methods. If you want to use the touchscreen, you can use the height bar on the left, or you can use the encoders on the console. The third encoder here is the height. So I can raise an object up to the ceiling or drop it down as low as it can go there using the encoders on the desk.
So these encoders, they're new and part of the upgrade package for the G3D. Can these be used to control more parameters?
They can. The new touch-sensitive encoders that are included on the G3D monitor panel are available for all of the parameters that you see on the screen here. So LCR, I can pan left and right with the first one. I can pan from the front to the back of the room with the second one. Then we have the height, and then we have the size or divergence on the fourth encoder here. So you can use either the encoders on the desk to pan in 3 dimensions, or you could use the touchscreen to do the panning as well.
So are these independent from each other, or can I use the encoders and the touchscreen at the same time?
Yeah, you can use both of them together, and this really comes in handy when you want to do full 3D panning. So I can reach out with my right hand and do the XY, front, back, left, right panning, and then I can use my left hand to do the height. So in a two-handed gesture, I can do complete 3-dimensional panning in an Atmos mix for either a mono object or a stereo object.
So that's with a mono object, but how does it work for stereo pairs?
So with a stereo pair, I can select a stereo pair here. This is a pair of objects. There are different mirroring options. So you can have it mirror just on the x-axis. So as I move one, the second object then follows on that axis. Or I can mirror on the XY, or just on the y-axis, so that they follow from left to right. Or you could have no mirroring at all, so that both objects in the stereo pair are actually occupying the same space. So it works in multiple different ways, and you can configure this however you want as you're working with object pairs.
So this already looks quite familiar to me. It looks like you're panning in the same way you would do it in a Dolby Music panner.
Exactly, yes. It's a very familiar way of working for customers who have already been working with the Dolby Music panner. You have the same type of screen here. We even have the same automatic Z shapes available as well. So rather than having a manual height with the height encoder or with the height bar here, we can select from 4 different options. So the first one is activated via the F1 key. This is the manual height that we're currently working with. I can press F2. This is the wedge shape, which moves an object from front to back in a wedge shape. F3 is the sphere shape. So this basically moves an object in a dome. over the head of the listener from front to back and left to right. And then F4 is the ceiling shape, and this will move an object from a shallow, low position at the very front, and then as you move the object back, it's basically just all in the top of the listening field at the top.
So that's great. So someone who's like myself, who's already familiar with the Dolby Music panel, I can just jump straight into that, get to grips with it really, really quickly and seamlessly.
Yeah, exactly. You've got all of those familiar controls right at your fingertips directly from the console surface.
So we've discussed the ability to get your analog channels into the Dolby Atmos software, the ability to mix with the encoders on the console, as well as the external sidearm with the software. What else do you get with this package?
Yeah, so the new G3D panel includes a host of new features. The first of which is the new 3D monitoring mode. And you can toggle your main monitor controller from being your stereo monitor controller. So this is my standard left-right mix. I can then press it in. It now turns into 3D mode, which is a remote control of the main output of the Dolby Atmos renderer. You can see there as I'm turning this down, I'm actually attenuating the output stage of the renderer. So I can quickly toggle into Atmos monitoring mode from the console surface.
And it looks like there's a few more controls on the upgraded monitor section.
Yes, exactly. As well as the 3D monitor mode, we have a bank of 9 switches that are dedicated renderer functions. So we have dim, and when I push this dim, this is different from the console stereo dim, which is still active up here. This is dimming the output of the renderer. And you can see here it's remotely controlling that renderer switch. We can also mute the main output of the renderer from the console surface, and we can mute the beds, or we can mute the objects from the console surface now as well.
So we've got full control now over the ability to monitor in Atmos from the console. What else can we do from here?
Well, included with the Atmos upgrade are some additional switches that control the renderer. So if I want to record arm my main Atmos master file, I can now do that from the console surface. I can press record. This is now recording the Atmos master file into the Dolby Atmos renderer, and I've triggered that from the surface of the console.
So I can trigger on my Dolby master file. Is there a way to audition this as well?
Yeah, so you can record arm it from the desk. You can also toggle between the input and the master tabs of the renderer from the console surface. And these are just nice features to add into this so that it makes Atmos mixing even more integrated into the console. And you're moving away from point and click with the mouse and letting the console surface be your main master control surface for the Atmos system.
So again, this is for people who are already familiar with the Genesys workflow, with the ability to work from the console to control your digital features, if you like. It's another step up to be able to just take that workflow into the Atmos world. Now, what about binaural? Because that's a massive part of the Atmos workflow, being able to monitor and check the binaural side of things. Are we able to do that as well?
Yes, we are. So with the G3D system, what we can do is we can route the binaural signal from the renderer. That can be sent through the console into the headphone amplifier via the analog or digital external. So you can use the console's powerful headphone amp to listen to the binaural feed coming directly from the renderer. So you can check that with your headphones, reference it against your main 714 system, and then produce a mix that way. So
we've got binaural covered. How does the main speaker configuration work then?
So with the G3D, I mentioned before, we have the StarNet ADA16 that is used as an external device that's part of this system. That device is connected to my loudspeakers in the studio, and it has 16 available outputs. So you could have up to a 916 loudspeaker array that has pristine digital to analog conversion handling your speaker system. From the G3D software, we can actually add an extra layer of control onto what we already have with the monitor controls that we discussed earlier. I can push the LS tab here, and then this brings up a representation of our loudspeaker array that you can now see on the left, which has replaced the object selection window.
So this is now giving me the layout of the speakers in my room. What kind of control does this give me?
So you can see here we've got a 714 speaker array, and as I mentioned before, you can go all the way up to a 916, so you can configure the layout to represent all the speakers you might have in your room. Now 714 is the most popular, but some people are going for a wider array nowadays that is supported, and then you can have an extra 2 in the ceiling as well. So once I pull these up on the speaker view, so this is the loudspeaker control view, I have cut and solo functionality over each individual speaker.
So how are we able to cut and solo individual speakers now with this?
So the ADA16 that's configured in the G3D system, that lives on the same local area network as the rest of your studio. So the DAW computer, the Genesys console, and the ADA16 are all sharing the same communications. And we can remotely cut individual outputs of that ADA16 from this interface. So if I want to just mute the left speaker, I can reach out and touch that, and I can add any number of cuts I want to. Or if I want to cut a custom group, I can use this click and drag interface, and any speaker that's within this group is then cut. So let's say I want to just cut the left-hand side. I can do that really quickly, and then I can clear it by drawing a box in an available space there.
Does the same work for the solo section as well?
It does. So I can also solo speakers by toggling this to solo mode, and now instead of cutting individual speakers, I'm cutting every other speaker rather than the one I just activated. So you can solo individual speakers, and they can be additive, or it can be set as momentary. So if you've got a problem in your mix, or if you just want to reference something that's going on above you, I could quickly solo one of the height speakers, or I could quickly solo all of the height speakers, or any using this custom group. We also have fixed groups as well. So I can toggle to solo just the LCR, or I could solo the surrounds, or just the heights. And the same applies for cut as well. So we have these fixed groups, and we have custom groups, and we have individual loudspeaker control right from the graphical interface here.
So we can use the console itself to attenuate the level of the Atmos renderer. We've got the ability to solo cut objects and beds, and I can control the solo and cut on the individual speakers as well. So it really is a complete package. So we've gone over the hardware and the software part of the G3D upgrade. Let's talk about the day-to-day functionality of it all, because with music, stereo or Atmos, we still lean heavily on the modern features like automation and things like that. Now, of course, we've got the Genesys Black plug-in controller. Can you give me a little explanation of how that all works?
So what we've done is, with the Atmos upgrade, we've expanded the functionality of the Genesys Control plugin. And this basically now gives you full panning control capability from the plugin, as well as from the G3D software on the console. And the way this works, it's a three-way handshake between the plugin, the G3D application running on the console, and the Dolby Atmos renderer. So I can grab hold of an object from the plugin, and this will also be shown on the software as well, and in the renderer. So if I make a move on this plugin here in the plugin window, you can see that the renderer is following exactly what I'm doing, or vice versa. And these moves are also then copied into the renderer as well. So if we have a look at the renderer here, and I move this object around, so you can see that object is being controlled from either the plugin or from the G3D application at the same time.
So now all that intelligence is now transposed into the DAW. That gives me the ability to start automating things.
It does. So just like the Genesys Control plugin, all of the power of this software system was to be able to remotely control the analog features of the desk from within the DAW. So all of the flying fader style automation, and even automation of the EQ, the dynamics, switch features of the desk, can now be written into the DAW on the timeline as DAW automation. We've now added an extra layer to that allows any of the objects that are selected over here to then be panned and controlled from the plugin, and now written in on your DAW timeline just from the Genesys Control plugin, in the exact same way that you would do any of your previous automation moves.
So if I want to automate something, draw some automation in, do I need to do it from the plugin, or can I do it from the software?
It can be done from any or all, essentially. So what I can do is I'll pull up this this track here, and this is objects 23, 24. The physical channel strip is channel 13 and 14. So that's where the analog circuitry is going through the desk. I'm adding analog EQ. Then I'm sending that out as objects 23 and 24, and I can apply automation from the plugin by adding them in as automatable parameters. So you can see here all of the object size, the object LCR and front back, that's all been added in so that it's available to automate. I can then set this track to one of the many automation write modes that Pro Tools has, and I'll set that ready to go, and we'll press play here. And now if I draw in automation from the plugin, this is now writing this in as an automation lane within Pro Tools. So if I just pull this up here on this track, this is object LCR. You'll see now that that is being drawn in on the timeline there as I make a move on the plugin. And if I pull that object pair up on the G3D as well, we're on object 23 and 24, you can see here that it's still being written in, or I can do it with the encoders too. These touch-sensitive encoders are really crucial to this upgrade because they allow for touch automation to be drawn in from the console surface, or indeed a combination, as we mentioned before, where I'm using my right hand to do the XY on the touch screen, and then the left hand is doing the Z, so the height panning, and this is all being drawn in into the DAW timeline. Great,
so I've got the ability to draw in the automation, well, by hand, or I can just use the DAW like you normally would?
Yeah, exactly. By having the automation live on the DAW timeline, all of these crucial object positioning moves that you might want to automate, like a whoosh going across your head or some electronic synthesizers going around the room, you can draw that in from the console if you want to do it on the fly, or if you want to have a bit more finesse and a bit more timing over what's going on in your session, you can use all of the powerful tools available within the DAW to draw automation in. And then crucially, all of that data is stored within your session. So you don't need to worry about timing things up and loading multiple different save points. You just load up your Pro Tools session, all the automation will play back into the G3D and then into the renderer.
So that's an amazing capability then, to be able to either control the automation externally or internally. But we know that Atmos mixers can have up to 128 objects, and this is only a 16-channel desk. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is the beauty of this system. We are not limited to the channel count of your console. The Atmos upgrade can function even on an 8-channel Genesys, all the way up to a 48-channel Genesys Black or a 64-channel Genesys. So basically, what you can do is you can select which objects you want to focus. And these are the objects that are reliant on the hardware insert method of routing the signal through the channel strip, through the EQ, back out into the system. So those objects are then available to control via this view you can see in the plugin here. So it gives you the full channel strip controls, including faders, and then the object window. But we're not limited to that. If we have a larger session that's way bigger than 16 available channels, we can still use the G3D to control all of those objects. So if I go a bit further down in my session here and pull open this window, you'll see this is still the Genesys Control plugin, but because we are beyond the 16 channel count of the desk, we don't see the full representation of all of the channel strip features. So it just appears blank, and it's a cut back version, which just gives you Genesys control over the objects.
So that's where the object window comes in, because I can select any object regardless of the channel count.
Yeah, exactly. This object selection, you'll see, goes all the way up to the top object of 128. So all of those objects are available to control from G3D regardless of the channel count of your desk. You just decide which objects you want to run through the circuitry of the analog processing, and then which ones you just want to control. And let's say I want to choose object 128, the very last one available to me. I can select that ready to control and then pull it up to be panned and controlled from the system here. So the console becomes your main master controller for all of the objects on your network.
So can I use this in conjunction with the Dolby Music Panel as well?
You could. So the objects available here are the ones that we have selected from the G3D, and you could have multiple other Atmos clients, such as the Dolby Music Panel in your DAW session, and the Dolby Music Panel can work with different objects. The only restriction is they can't work on the same object. So you could have some sequencing going on in your session with the Dolby Music Panel on maybe 10 objects, and then the remainder of the objects are controlled from G3D with full panning and automation capability provided from the G3D software and the Genesys control plugin.
So we've got our focus objects going through the desk. You can see the meters there. We've got the additional objects being controlled from the software. What about the master section over there? I can see the meters moving.
With an Atmos mix, as we explained before, you're sending signals through the desk, effectively like a hardware insert through each channel strip. It then loops through the analog circuitry, giving you that Neve flavor, and then gets routed digitally. So the beauty of that means that the busing system on the right-hand side of the desk, so your 8-track busing and your stereo system, is still preserved. So you're not actually using this in an Atmos mix, which means you can use the local panning system on the desk, so your left-right panning and the stereo bus at the same time as you're doing an Atmos mix. And one doesn't affect the other, essentially. So I could do a local stereo mix through the console busing system. I could even use some of my stem buses here. And this would output via the mix output of the console. I could record that main 2-track master. At the same time, I'm doing an Atmos mix into the renderer, and I can toggle the monitoring between the two independently as well. And because the busing system is unused in an Atmos mix, including the AUXs, you can actually use your aux sends to send signals from each channel into something like an analog reverb, which we have here. We've got the RMX16 500 reverb connected to AUX1. I can send signals from individual channels into that, just like I would in a stereo mix. And then I bring that back in through the console's reverb return, and then send it out as an object into the Atmos system. So that then becomes its own object that I can pan around the room as well. So you can see here that with this type of system, you can actually get your outboard gear as well as the Genesys into an Atmos mix quite easily.
Amazing. So regardless of whether you're an existing Genesys user or you're looking to get into Atmos for the first time, this really is an all-in-one solution.